Well, Mazda has finally done it. They've dropped a turbo in the 6. After 6 years of waiting with only one engine, a base 2.5 liter 4-cylinder engine, Mazda has finally come to its senses and dropped in the 2.5 liter Skyactiv 4-cylinder turbo engine from the CX-9 3-row crossover. I'm Jared here with carbuzz.com, and this week I have been reviewing the 2018 Mazda 6. This is the signature trim that they've given me, which is the highest trim model that is offered for 2018. And Mazda has given their midsize sedan a significant update for the 2018 model year, but it is not an all-new model, as you can likely tell from simply looking at it. It's not 100% different from the model that it replaces in 2017, but it does have this new revised front fascia and a number of significant enhancements on the interior, as we'll see when we get on inside in there. We do have this awesome gunmetal grille here that is unique to this signature trim. We have a nice little bit of a bug there from a little bit of highway driving, but this car is a very executive looking package. I think that it still looks great to this day. This is the Kodo design language that has looked great since the Mazda 6 debuted. I don't love this white color. I think this car happens to look a lot better if you get it in red, but it is still a very, very handsome car. And I mentioned that this is the signature trim, so that means we're going to have a starting price of $34,700 because this is the top trim that you can get on the Mazda 6. The base sport model with cloth seats and an available 6-speed manual is going to come in at $23,000. You can also get the touring trim for $25,700. That's also going to have the base 2.5 liter 187 horsepower engine, but that's going to add leatherette seats, power driver seat, a moonroof, heated seats, and radar cruise control, which is a very impressive option for a $25,000 car. If you go for the Grand Touring, which is $29,200, you're going to get this engine, the 2.5 liter turbo engine with 250 horsepower and a whopping 310 foot-pounds of torque. You're also going to get built-in navigation and Bose speakers. If you go for the Reserve, which is just below this trim that we have here, you're going to get the active driver's display, which I'll show you that is in this car, and you're going to get heated rear seats. This signature adds a couple of really, really nice touches, like a 360-degree camera, parking sensors, and Nappa leather, which we're going to go ahead and find out how nice that is on the inside of this car here. We have keyless entry, so just push the button with the key in your pocket. This car is actually already unlocked, and as you can see here, we have this dark brown leather, which is not my favorite trim. I'd rather have black or even tan leather, but it is definitely a very expensive looking option at that. I'm just not a huge fan of the color personally. And we do have the same dashboard that we found on Mazda 6s in the past, although it is a little bit revised. It is a little bit different than what we've had in the past. I'm going to go ahead and step on in now and show you what's new on the Mazda 6's interior. We have our start button up here. It's kind of a weird spot for it. Usually they're much lower. This one is up here, which is a bit odd, but you get used to it if you've owned this car. So the gauges are pretty similar to what we've found in the past, although this middle gauge that has our speedometer is now replaced by a screen instead of a physical gauge, which means that in the middle there you can see things like our trip. I can have it show trip A or trip B. I can have it show the lane departure warning and lane keep assist in the middle there, as well as the adaptive cruise control distance, which can be controlled here on this side of the steering wheel. The adaptive cruise control is excellent, and it does bring the car all the way to a stop, and that's available on touring trims and above, which is really, really nice on this car. I really, really like that feature. And then if I cycle through a couple more times, you see the service due, and then you just see a normal needle, and it really actually looks like a real needle. It's hard to tell on the video here, but you even have a digital mock-out of like the little end there. So yeah, they really did a good job. It's a little boring that it's not really done in color, that it's really just black and white, but it is pretty elegant, and I really like the way that it's rendered. And then on the sides there, you have your average MPG, you have your temperature, you have your fuel range, and your trip. Up here, because we have the signature, we have this head-up display, which you can see the pod for it up here. I'm not sure if you can actually see what's being displayed on it, but I can tell you from experience that this is one of the best head-up displays in the business. It gives you not only your speed, it gives you your blind spot monitoring. So before you've even had a chance to look at the blind spot monitors that are on the actual mirrors, it'll give you a sort of logo to let you know that somebody is in your blind spot. So before you even turned your head to do a lane change, you will already know whether or not somebody is in your blind spot. Up here we have Mazda's infotainment system. It's better in the 2018 model year. This has always been a pretty easy system to use, although it's never been my favorite. It has never really been too frustrating to use. You have this basic home menu here that has your navigation, settings, communication, entertainment, and then applications. And that applications folder is really important because for the first time ever, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which is a big deal for this car. One of my biggest complaints with this car is that I would have preferred to have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto because I think the voice commands are just easier to use on those. They read your texts aloud better than this system. I've had an issue on every single Mazda that I've driven where when I get a text message in and it goes to read it for me, it will be from the wrong person. So it'll be somebody from my contacts list that there's no way that person's texting me. And I've talked to Mazda about this and they can't seem to pinpoint what the problem is. I'm really happy that Apple CarPlay and Android Auto are available, but there is a big problem with them. As you can see here, if I touch this home button, that takes me to the home menu. And then I can also touch entertainment. I can go back to home. I can touch apps because this is a touch screen. Unfortunately, Mazda in all their models makes the decision to lock this touch screen while you're in movement. So you have to rely on this little controller here. It looks a little bit like what you'd get on, say, a BMW with these home buttons around here. I really like the way those are laid out. Get shortcuts to music, home, nav, your favorites, and a back button, and here's your volume knob here. This works fine, and it's not that distracting while you drive, but they force you to use Android Auto. I'm not sure about Apple CarPlay, although I would assume that would be the same as well. They force you to use those systems with the controller, whereas those systems are very, very much optimized for touch. So I don't know why Mazda put in this really, really nice touch screen and then don't let you touch it with Apple CarPlay. That's a bit silly to me. Down here we have our climate controls. If you've been in an Audi recently, this will look really familiar. I'm complimenting Mazda greatly here because this is just a really clean layout for all of this. You can adjust the temperature here. We do have ventilated seats on this top trim. They work really well. They suck, as a matter of fact. I was talking to a couple of Mazda engineers who told me that their ventilated seats are engineered to suck air rather than blow it on you because they feel that that's the best way to cool you down. I don't know if that's 100% true from seat to seat, but these ventilated seats work extremely well. You also get a heated steering wheel that gets really hot on this car. We do have paddle shifters on our model, although I don't really use them that often. We also have automatic headlights and our automatic wipers on this side. And we have an interesting feature down here over on this. If I touch this little button that says view, it's going to pull up our 360-degree camera, which is absolutely one of the best in the business. And if you see, if I turn the wheel here, the wheels on this little display are actually turning with it to let you know sort of exactly where your wheels are pointing. It's really ingenious, and I wish more car companies would do that. The only problem that I have with this system is when I throw it into reverse to engage it, it defaults to this backup camera, and then I have to trigger the 360-degree camera. I wish Mazda would just allow me to, as soon as the car goes into reverse, that this is the default setting that I see. And I triggered that reversing camera with this. It is a 6-speed automatic. It is the only option, unfortunately, that you can get with this turbo engine. The base Mazda 6 Sport is available with a 6-speed manual, which is interesting. I'd like to drive that. I drove one a very long time ago and found it to be pretty fun, although then you're getting a base car without all of these options, so that is definitely something to think about. You can slap it over here to manual, and you can shift it on the paddles as well, and you do have a sport mode here that you just simply push up for sport and then go the other way back down to regular. I don't have too much of a problem with this transmission. It's definitely not the smoothest transmission in the world. I would prefer if it had a couple more gears in this iteration, although we'll talk more about that on the road. I don't wish it was a manual. A manual would not fix the issues that I have with the way this car drives. Down here we have our electronic parking brake and auto hold, so when you come to a stop, simply take your foot off the brake and it will hold the car there. And then this dash is really nicely laid out. We have our cup holders here where I've hidden the key. So these cup holders are really down low, so you can put in pretty big bottles without them interrupting your space. And then you do have a little bit more storage space there in front of the shifter. Now I'm going to go ahead and step into the back of this car. But before I do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about these trim materials. We have this nice wood, we have suede here. The materials in this car are just extremely, extremely premium. I think this is one of, if not the best interiors in the segment. There are few cars that can really compete with this. There are a few things that I would prefer. I'd prefer a lighter interior color, and I think that some of these suedes are not holding up that well. I don't know if this is Alcantara or just a generic suede, but it doesn't seem to be holding up all that well. And I do wish that we had a panoramic moonroof, although it's not a huge deal to me. I don't necessarily use those that often, but it is not available on the Mazda 6 if you do really want one of those. So back here we have a pretty roomy back seat. I wouldn't say that it's the biggest in the segment. You can see these are also mirrored on the front seat. These little metal trim pieces, I believe that's a signature trim piece. You can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments that the signature gets these. I thought when I first sat on them that they would be a little bit uncomfortable, and they kind of reminded me of something you'd find in like a GM car, like a Cadillac or Buick in the 60s. I think they look pretty cool, and you don't really feel them when you're sitting on them, which is pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and sit in this seat. You can see on the back of the front seat here, we also have that mirrored. We have our air vent controls, pretty basic. And I have a lot of legroom sitting behind myself. I have plenty of it. This is a very nice size car, although, again, not the biggest one in the segment. And if I pull this down, the center armrest, there's no way to grab it. You kind of just have to reach in there. You do have some cup holders here with your heated seat controls. You do have rear heated seats on this car, and then you have two USBs in here, so if you kind of wrap up the cord really well, you could technically plug it in and lay a phone flat down here, which is kind of nice. And then we're going to go ahead and show you the trunk, which is pretty cavernous as well. There is an exterior trunk release, or you can activate it here. So now let's come along back, check out the trunk. It is pretty roomy, and if you pull these two, you can have a 60/40 rear folding seat, so you can have even more room to store stuff back here. This trunk is a little bit light and flimsy, although some people might like that. I think it feels a little bit flimsy for a car that is otherwise really, really premium, but some people might like a trunk that is light so they don't hurt themselves lifting it up. And then we do have this interesting spoiler along the back here, where the Mazda logo is just kind of like cut out of it. I think that looks actually kind of cool, although I would prefer it, again, if it was in a more dynamic color than white. You have these really, really nice, aggressive wheels. I think they look like something you'd get on a Lexus GS, actually. I believe the GS F Sport has wheels that look very similar to this. So this is just a really, really stunning car. It always has been. And Mazda has just kept this design with color like red or blue is just going to accent it a lot better. So now I'm going to get behind the wheel of this car and I'm going to tell you how this turbocharged engine has really changed the characteristics of the 6, for better and for worse, unfortunately. Alright, so now I'm driving the 2018 Mazda 6, and ever since this car came out, I have just long since postured that this is the driver's choice of all of the cars in the mid-size, non-premium segment, that this was just the absolute best one to drive if you were an enthusiast. And a couple years, 6 years later, after the cars come out, I still agree with that statement wholeheartedly. When you get this car on a back road, a little winding back road like I have right here, it is still the best car in the segment to toss around these corners. The steering, the suspension tuning, I don't think anybody has been able to match what the Honda engineers have put together here. This is just such a nice, coherent package. Mazda has just found a way to give this car such intuitive steering and intuitive suspension tuning that isn't too firm and too aggressive, but is yet fun enough that you can take it on a back road and really enjoy it. And in the time that this Mazda 6 has been on the market, there have been a lot of new entries into the market. Toyota has overhauled the Camry, Honda has overhauled the Accord, and both of those cars are very, very improved to drive as well, but I still think this stands as the most fun car to drive. The steering is a little heavier than some of the other cars you'd find in this segment, although not uncomfortably so. You get a lot of feel on center, mid-corner, no matter where you are on the steering rack. It just gives you loads of feedback. It's not quite Miata good, but it is still extremely, extremely good. The suspension, kind of the same thing. It's certainly not the most comfortable car in the class, nor is it the most uncomfortable as well. I drove the XSE Camry, which is the sportier tuned Camry that has the V6, and I thought that suspension felt a little bit more rough over the big bumps. This isn't necessarily floaty over the bumps. You definitely feel road imperfections. It definitely likes to transmit any imperfections in the road to the driver, but it does so in a way that you're really happy about, to be honest. It just gives it to you in a way that you feel it, but it's never uncomfortable. So now let's talk about the big improvement, the thing that everybody has been waiting for on this car, a turbocharged engine. Now, one of the big problems that I always had with the Mazda 6 was that it was only available with one engine, 2.5 liter, 4-cylinder engine with about 187 horsepower, and that is still the base engine on this car if you go for the sport or touring trims, as we talked about earlier. I have the signature trim, this top one, so I have the big boy motor, the 2.5 liter turbocharged Skyactiv 4-cylinder. That's good for 250 horsepower if you use premium gas, and 310 foot-pounds of torque, which is a huge whopping number. That's the more important figure on this engine. And it's worth noting that if you put regular gas in this car, you will get only 227 horsepower. It's interesting that Mazda put that feature in there, the ability to put in regular gas. I think a lot of people are really gonna like that. A lot of people that just aren't gonna drive this car too spiritedly, and they're gonna save a lot of money using regular gas. I don't know if fuel economy is hurt from that. I haven't driven this car long enough to be able to test that with enough accuracy, although I did drive the Mazda CX-9, their 3-row crossover, which has this same engine, and I had that car for a 2-week stretch of time, and I did test it on premium and regular gas to see if I could feel a huge difference in the power, and I really couldn't, and that's a good thing for Mazda. It wouldn't be good if you put regular gas in and then suddenly your performance was really hurt. So I'm gonna go ahead and I have the open road to myself. I'm gonna put it in sport mode. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, and we're gonna do a 0 to 60 run here. Minimal wheel spin. It picks up really good. Now, I do have a few complaints about this engine. While I am happy that it's finally available, that there's finally a more powerful variant of this car, it's not quite the engine that I expected it to be. 250 horsepower is no slouch. But when you have cars like the Toyota Camry V6 producing 301 horsepower, 250 is really not all that much. The big figure is that torque. And what makes this car so nice to drive as a luxury car, as a daily driver experience, is that torque. It's still mated to a 6-speed automatic, and it still goes to the front wheels. So unlike some of the other more powerful cars in this segment, it doesn't really spin its wheels too bad. You can light them up if you go ahead and turn off traction control and really just mash it like a maniac. You can get those front tires to spin, but it's not uncontrollable. It puts its power down really, really well. But it shifts really early. I had my foot pinned to the floor there, and it just shifted at 5,000 RPM, a little over that. When I floor it, it just doesn't love to give me that lowest gear. This engine is a grunter, which means it doesn't really like to rev out to the top of the rev range. The top of the red line is only 6,000 RPM anyway, and it really doesn't even enjoy hitting it very often. So I've heard a lot of people, when I reviewed the Miata a couple months ago, say to me, oh, well, that car would be so much better if they just stuck the turbo engine in it. Yeah, those people have not driven this engine, because this would be completely wrong for a Miata. This engine just doesn't love to rev. It loves to be quiet. It loves to remain low in the rev range and deliver its torque smoothly. So as far as a smooth power delivery, it does a very good job. This transmission is not my favorite. It's a 6-speed automatic. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in its manual mode. There, I just hit red line. It didn't sound good. Let it get to the red line. It sounds okay. I think that this engine is just a bit industrial sounding. I'm not sure why. Mazda can definitely make an engine that sounds pretty good. I've driven the new Miata, and that thing sounds absolutely fantastic. But this turbo engine is just not one of the better sounding engines on the market. It revs. Feel it die towards the top, and then you might have heard that I let it get near the red line and pulled the paddle, and it just bogged down. It didn't want to give me a shift. The paddles are pretty fun if you're able to keep it within that mid-range, but that's not where I like to drive a car. That's not where the cars are the most fun to drive. You really want to let them rev out a bit. So I found myself leaving this car in automatic more than I've found myself using the paddle shifters on the wheel, interestingly enough. So while this car is really, really fun, I think it is more fun to drive than some of the other cars in the segment. I would not go so far as to say that it is as fun as something that is a little more advanced. Let's say a BMW 3 Series, let's say the Kia Stinger. Those are rear-wheel drive performance cars that I think all feel a little bit more performance-oriented than this car. The steering is still good and the suspension is still good, but that engine is just not my cup of tea for this sort of driving. In real world traffic and in highway driving, you'll probably love it. What it does so well is, with this 6-speed automatic, is since it has so much torque, you rarely need to downshift. So when you're driving on the highway and you got that slow driver in front of you that you just want to get past, you just put your foot down, it grunts its way, you know, to passing them, and it didn't even downshift there. I put my foot down and it gave me a significant bump in power, and it, you know, brought me along quite well, but it didn't downshift. So this transmission is pretty darn good. I do think that this car could be updated with either an 8-speed or maybe even a 10-speed. I know Mazda, I haven't heard any announcements from Mazda, so I don't think that's gonna happen anytime soon, but I think 6 gears in this day and age is a little bit low. I drove the Kia Optima Turbo, which also had a 6-speed automatic, but I found that that one was more eager to shift, and I found that that 2-liter turbo was just a little bit more eager to rev as well. And I'm driving along in sport mode now, and I'm just hearing that engine, that grrr, like not so great sound of the engine. So I really just haven't used sport mode all that much. I've kind of just let it do its thing, let the steering be fun, and let the engine be quiet and in the background. And from the week of driving, I've averaged about 26 miles per gallon. Mazda says you'll get about 23 in the city, 31 on the highway, and about 26 combined. So I think that's pretty accurate. I'd love to be able to test that out with regular fuel as well. I think it should do just as well. So what is the Mazda 6 Signature? This car is about $36,000 as optioned, but it is very luxurious in here, extremely premium. I think that as far as the other cars in this segment, this is among the top. This is among the most premium. The materials are amazing. The interior is comfortable. I love driving this car on the highway, and I love driving it on a back road as well. So if you are a driver's car, I would still definitely consider this car. A lot of people are going to complain that it doesn't come with a manual, with a turbo engine. My opinion is that a manual really wouldn't help the power delivery of this car, because this engine just doesn't love to rev. I'd love to see a tuner maybe come along and see if they can change the boost characteristics of that turbo and maybe make it a little happier to rev towards the top of the rev range. That might fix it. A manual, not so much. You can still get a manual on the sport trim of the 6. That's with that base 187 horsepower engine, and that would be a fun car to drive, but I think this car is just really crying out for either an 8-speed or a 10-speed that could take better advantage of that torque curve. I noticed a couple times when I'm accelerating from a start that the shifts are just a little bit jerky. You know, you feel big gaps in the gear ratios that wouldn't be there if it had a couple more gears. And the Mazda 6 is still one of the best driver's cars in the segment. I think the only other car that I would really benchmark against this car as far as interior is the Accord, which has a very premium interior as well. So if you're just looking for a fun to drive family car that's not going to draw too much attention, the Mazda 6 is still on my highly recommended list, and I am going to give it a rank of great buy. It's not a must buy, but it's definitely a great buy in this segment. And if you've liked this review and you'd like to see more, be sure to subscribe to the Car Buzz Unboxing YouTube channel and download our app on iOS and Android. And be sure to follow us on Instagram, and you can follow me personally at CarBuzzJared to see more of my car reviews like this Mazda 6. Hope you've enjoyed the video. See you next time. I'm going to keep enjoying this awesome Mazda 6.